Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Fantasy Griddle podcast. As always, you can find our rankings, fantasy news, and more on fantasygriddle.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Fantasy Griddle. Tonight, we're going to be talking Week 1 DFS as well as covering news from around the NFL. We do have a special guest joining us on the Griddle tonight. His name is Pete Manzinelli, better known as the Manz. So let's get right into it. Here's our interview with Pete Manzinelli right here on the Fantasy Griddle podcast. At this time, we want to welcome our first ever guest in the history of the Fantasy Griddle. He's a DFS legend. He's the founder, CEO, and lead developer of Manzcoin and Manzcoin Lit. He's a must-follow on Twitter at Pete Manzinelli for fantasy football, cryptocurrency, and poker content. Welcome to the show, the most interesting Manz in the world, Pete Manzinelli.
What's up, my dudes? Thank you for having me on, although I must say I'm a little worried for you guys having me as your first guest because it's kind of like a lot of people have told me once you go the Manz, you can't go back. And I feel like you guys either have to have me on every single week to kind of sustain this hype, or you just need to shut down the show because you guys just knocked it out of the fucking park with your first pick.
We wanted to start right at the top with Pete Manzinelli.
That's right. It's nowhere to go but downhill from here. Best of luck with that, fellas.
Yeah, this might be the last episode.
Yeah, we got to cover a lot of ground here. This is going to be the first and last episode of the Fantasy Griddles.
Pete, I got to ask you. I watched your broathlon video earlier today. I'd seen it before. And how did you guys start that up? And what's the competition like? Was that the second time you guys had done it?
Okay, yeah. So you saw you watched the basketball one?
Yeah. You guys were just drinking the whole time at a slam dunk contest at the end.
Yeah, so it was last year in like February. Johnny Bales, he works for the Action Network and co-founded Fantasy Labs. He had put something out on Twitter that he was into exercise prop bets and for accountability reasons and whatever. And I was like, okay, that's cool and all that. You guys are doing mile bets and pull-ups, but what if you guys actually did something truly astounding and impressive and had feats of both athletic and alcoholic strength? So in my big, beautiful brain, I came up with the broathlon, and the inaugural version was football themed. We had a beer mile, a shot put, a dizzy field goal, and then we played 2-on-2. And then this year, we, of course, did the basketball version. And, we had some great events. We had Edward 40 hands where we taped 40s to our hands and couldn't, finish the game until you had finished your entire 40. But, it's a little hard for me to talk about because I did create this event and I have twice come up empty handed. So it's a bit of a sore subject, but I am still very proud of the creativity on display with these events.
And I'm also like super intrigued by the Manzcoin. I know Duncan bought one the other day on the website manzcoin.biz. And what can you tell us about Manzcoin? I know that you're in a battle with McDonald's over cryptocurrency.
Yeah, dude, this is, it's been a wild ride. This, I would say like past 6 or so months, everyone knows who was following crypto. In December of last year, we had a big bull run. Bitcoin was pumping. All these altcoins were pumping. And I just saw, a real lack in the crypto market of something tangible, something crypto, but something tangible. And so I invented the world's first ever physical cryptocurrency, Manzcoin. It, of course, has my logo and likeness on it, and only 69 ever were made. And that I launched that in April. We promptly sold out of that. The price skyrocketed. And due to demand and me wanting this to be a crypto that could scale, that could truly change the world, I thought, it's great that everybody's sitting on their Manzcoins like a chunk of gold, but we need something. We need a silver to the gold. And so I, of course, created Manzcoin Lit, which is what Duncan is now in possession of. Best fucking decision of your life, Duncan. And there is that other side plot where McDonald's recently launched the Mac coin, which sounds suspiciously like Manzcoin. In their press release, they called it the world's first burger-backed cryptocurrency. It was as if they were lifting the copy directly from my press releases and website. And so, I had to go serve them a cease or be deceased letter. And they've really shut up since then.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy I decided to invest, Manz. I got my coin right here. And last year I made kind of a stupid decision. I took my fantasy football winnings, about $1,200. I put it into crypto, watched that tank, and looking back on it, I'm thinking maybe I should have just taken that money and put it into something physical, like a Manz coin lit.
That's exactly, dude. All that internet crypto money, it disappeared. But where's that Man's coin lit? It's sitting right in your grummy little hands right now. You can feel it, you can touch it, you can smell it, you can rub yourself on it. That's a true currency, my man.
I appreciate that. And I got a little graph here, and I got a little card with it, so I'm pretty happy.
Just to clarify, those are flames, not a graph.
Oh, those are flames. Okay.
Those are flames. Dude,
even better.
It's lit, dude. Those are flames. I'm gonna have to work on that if people are getting confused. Everyone out there, when you get your personalized certificate for which number Man's coin lit you get, those are in fact flames underneath the number. Thank you for helping me troubleshoot this issue. It's a bug, not a feature. You're welcome.
Manz, I know you're everywhere doing everything. What do you got going on lately, business wise and everything?
Yeah, dude, Man's coin lit stuff is still ongoing. Hit me up at the mans.69.420@gmail.com if you want one, or slide into my DMs, but no dick pics. Other than that, dude, I'm just getting ready for football season. I feel like the past 7 or 8 months have been very crypto focused for Manz. Of course, I had the interlude where I went to the gambling Olympics, but I am now locked in to the NFL. I am locked in to DFS. I am ready to crush week in and week out. And dude, yeah, I think that's all that's on my mind right now. Other than women and money and like really good friendships is the NFL, dude.
Well, that's a perfect segue into why we're having you on tonight. I assume that you're ready for week 1 of DFS. Do you have kind of a general strategy that you employ in DFS? Is there some kind of angle you try to work going into it, or is every week unique?
Well, here's the thing. As far as game selection, life is too short to grind out $5 cash games. Okay. I'm not looking to optimize a cash game lineup all week so I can maybe win 51% return on my money. No, dude, I gun for the Millie Maker every week. I build tournament lineups. I hop in tournaments that my friends create. I hop in my own tournament that I create, the Man's GPP. Check out the link on my YouTube, sign up. And that's what I do, dude. I'm here to win the Millie Maker. That is my goal. That is always my goal. Last year, I finished 33rd in one of the weekly Millie Makers. I was very, very damn close to shipping it. And that's what the Man's is all about. It's about gunning for glory.
I love it. I too take that approach to the DFS game. If I'm going to win, I want to have a chance at that Millie for sure.
That's what I'm talking about.
So I know in the past you've mentioned that you kind of do a dumpster dive on quarterbacks and take kind of once you scroll down far enough and kind of find a name you can live with, that's the quarterback you go with. Is that your strategy for week 1? Do you have any person in mind, or?
Now it's interesting you say that. One of the first videos I did was a couple Decembers ago. I had Adam Levitan's on and we did a lineup review of my week 16 lineup. And I'd like to just say I was ahead of my time because my quarterback that week was a backup Jimmy Garoppolo's, and sure, maybe he didn't see the field that game, but folks, who is a starting caliber NFL quarterback that people are drooling over? Busty porn stars in the NorCal area are apparently drooling over. Okay, this is a man that I was ahead of. But to get back to your question, it's interesting. This year on DraftKings, they have adjusted their pricing for quarterbacks to where it's a much flatter salary structure. So there aren't, the highs and lows, and they're really making you make tougher decisions. So I will say it's not as quite automatic as going cheap at quarterback this year, because in a lot of instances, it's not that much extra salary to move up to, say, a mid-tier or an even elite tier quarterback.
So, Manz, I got a general question for you. The time that you had the number 33 in the Millie Maker, who'd you have going in that lineup, and what was the highest that you got?
Oh man, dude, I do love talking about this lineup because this was a gorgeous lineup. I'll ask you guys, do you remember the game? I can't remember the exact week. I think it was like 7 or 11 or something. Anyways, it was a 4 p.m. slate, and it was the Texans. This is before Watson got hurt, so maybe it was week 7. It was the Texans at Seattle, and that game just shoot out. It shot the fuck out. Do you guys remember that game?
Yeah, Watson had 4 touchdowns, right?
Yeah, and so I had a Russell Wilson and then Tyler Lockett, Paul Richardson stack. So a lot of people were on Wilson, but they had him with the classic Baldwin and Jimmy Graham. And then I brought it back with Will Fuller. And so I had the like pretty unique game stack there. The problem was I didn't game stack it enough because that was the game that Lamar Miller and DeAndre Hopkins went off as well. So if I would have just gone full bore, you might be looking to a Millie Maker winner. And, frankly speaking, I probably wouldn't be on this podcast. I would be on one of my mini yachts. So yeah, luckily for you guys, I didn't in fact win, but yes, it was all about targeting a high shootout potential game, but going with contrarian options within that game.
I know you've mentioned in the past that, that a lot of times you'll look at the top running back that's being taken and you'll kind of, spin off of that and take the quarterback that's linked to them instead of the running back. Do you still believe in that philosophy?
Yeah, I think that's a very good strategy. It all depends on when you're making a play like that, it's about ownership, right? You're kind of reading the tea leaves. You're listening to the trade winds on the fantasy Twitters, on the podcast, and you see everyone talking about a must play. It's like, okay, we got to play Melvin Gordon this week. Melvin Gordon is a smash against the Chiefs. Melvin Gordon this, Melvin Gordon that. And all of a sudden you think, all right, people have landed on this situation, this player, because it is a good game environment for points. But then you ask yourself, what if the Chargers play really well, but Melvin Gordon doesn't get those points? Then how do the Chargers still succeed? Well, it's probably going to be through the air. So maybe we fade Melvin Gordon and we go all in with Rivers in the pass catchers. And obviously this is just a random example. I actually like Melvin Gordon a lot this week. But the point is looking for situations and then maybe pivoting within those, because the truth is the community, the DFS, the research, the people out here, everybody's pretty damn good at identifying which games have high scoring potential. So it's how do you get creative within that when you know a lot of people are going to be on that game?
Interesting. One other thing I think is pretty interesting and I wanted to bring up with all this Colin Kaepernick politics and the NFL talk, one thing that you brought up a while back, and I think you were at the forefront of this discussion, was fullbacks in the NFL and whether or not the NFL was racist against fullbacks. And Aaron Ripkowski was recently cut. Where do you stand on this issue now?
Yeah, dude. First off, I kind of want to say that's a little too soon for that question. Ripkowski is like a family member to me, and it's like, would you bring up someone's death in the family to them just like weeks after that death? Probably not, but I'm super mature and I can handle this type of question. But yeah, frankly, it's been hard. Aaron Ripkowski was the classic guy. If you have 150 lineups, you're probably sprinkling him into 149 of them. And so to have to not have that guy on the slate, it's been really tough. But I will say it's not all doom and gloom on the fullback front. I mean, in fact, when God closes a Ripkowski, he opens a Juszczyk, because I don't know if you guys heard, but Jerick McKinnon's is out for the season, and everybody on Twitter is like, who's going to catch passes? Alfred Morris can't catch passes. They're like, well, Matt Breida might be able to catch passes. And it's like, hello, Kyle Juszczyk here. I have hands given to me from God that have stickum on them, and I will scoop up all of these little dunk passes from Jimmy Garoppolo's this year. So yeah, Kyle Juszczyk, he's in the catbird seat there in San Francisco, and I see some of the big members of the community, the Evan Silvas, okay, they're starting to come around on this idea of Juszczyk being a factor. And yeah, don't get me started on the fullbacks, dude. I'll be talking your ear off about Patrick DeMarco before you know it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to touch on a sensitive subject there, but I appreciate you being professional.
Yeah, of course. That's all I do. I'm a pro's pro.
So, Manz, I'm seeing a lot of guys that could be in starting roles at running back this weekend. Alfred Morris, like you mentioned, Mike Gillisley getting a lot of carries for the Saints, minimum priced guys, even Antonio Gates at tight end who just re-signed with the Chargers. Do you try to avoid the minimum price players because they're going to be so heavily owned?
Yeah, I think it's especially interesting for week one just because, DraftKings released these salaries, a month, 6 weeks ago. So there's been a ton of time for value to open up. And that's exactly what's happened, with those guys that you mentioned. Rex Burkhead has been a guy people have been eyeing forever at 4,200, just way underpriced for what his role is projected to be. And so I think what's going to happen this week is you're going to see a really big studs and duds approach. Everyone's going to be filling in these cheap guys. You got Kenny Stills at 4,700, who's projected to be a starter. Keelan Cole now in the wake of the Marquise Lee injury. So I think what you're hinting at is correct, that people are going to be trying to put in these cheap minimum price guys. Royce Freeman, 4,500. That's another guy who now looks like the starter in Denver. So I think a chalky roster construction is going to be studs and duds, people trying to fit in Alvin Kamara, Antonio Brown, and then some of these cheap guys. So maybe the way we need to differentiate ourselves this week is to go with a more smoother, kind of average, balanced construction where we're taking guys in that middle tier. And you're not necessarily sacrificing points, but what you're doing is just getting yourself on a subset of players that the entire population isn't on because they're so giddy to mash in the value plays with the studs.
And I was super intrigued. Last year, I listened to your podcast that you did with Eric McClung. I think it was A Full Tilt. And you had mentioned like a basic formula that you use for picking your defense each week. They had to be under 10% owned, and there was a few other characteristics. What is your strategy for picking a DST in DFS?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about DST, right, is it is so heavily impacted by turnovers. I think the trap is to try to find the low scoring game. But I think when we're looking for defenses, we want to make sure that we are getting a lower owned defense for tournaments because it is reliant on turnovers and touchdowns, which we all know are pretty random. Even if you have a team shut down the opposition, if it's just done through, forcing a bunch of, 3 and outs, that's going to do no good for our team. So, you hate to say get lucky, but we need to get lucky with some turnovers. So yeah, I like focusing on what teams have a good pass rush, which teams can cause turnovers. And I'm not going to get scared away if I think a game can be high scoring. A lot of people are into Patrick Mahomes this year. I really like him too, but he's in a really tough spot against the Chargers this week. And people might shy away from it because, hey, look, the Chiefs have all these offensive weapons. Like the Chargers are going to give up some points. That's fine. I don't care. It's Patrick Mahomes in one of his first few career starts, and he's going to probably turn the ball over, and the Chargers might be able to convert that into touchdowns. So those are the kind of situations I'm looking at. Where can I see turnovers? And I don't necessarily care as much about how much the team is going to score. I think that's the hang up some people find themselves on when they're looking for defenses.
Hey, Manz, this early in the season, when you're picking a player for your lineup, how much do you actually consider the opponent's rank?
Oh, you mean just like how this early in the season, before it has really been established, like how good are they against tight ends, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, like I'm looking here and it's got like Barkley versus Jacksonville, and it says that they're 29th ranked. I'm assuming that's against the running back position, but do you take that into account? I mean, when you're building your lineup as the season goes on or even now?
I think it comes into play way more later in the season when the trends are truly established. Early on in the season, defensive performance year to year isn't that stable. We've seen teams like the Broncos or even the Seahawks go from having elite defenses to being mid-pack to sometimes even bad defenses. So I have a hard time using those, say, week one opposition ranks because all that's showing you, I think you're referencing like on DraftKings when it shows you that opponent rank, that's all data from last year. And maybe they have something that's factoring in new additions, like the Bears all of a sudden get Khalil Mack and maybe their defensive projection should be more bullish. So that could affect it. But yeah, for the most part, I'm not worried too much about that stuff. for week one. I kind of want to see where the trends are going. And I think there are certain exceptions, especially like on a player level. Obviously, an interesting one, you mentioned the Jags versus the Giants. We know they have great cornerbacks, and so maybe that's going to affect Odell. But for the most part, I'm not going to read into that too much the first few weeks. And I think that also means the first few weeks are the best time to be contrarian, to go with your gut, to identify players and situations you like before everyone catches up, because they are going to catch up and the data is going to get good and everybody's going to get sharp and there's not going to be much of an edge. So I will say this, if you have a hot take, if you think an offense is going to take the leap this year, you think a player is going to take a leap, don't worry about the matchup. Don't worry about ownership. Go in on them and maybe you will be able to reap the benefits before everybody catches up.
Yeah, that kind of leads me into my next question, actually, because I was thinking, someone sees a red matchup like the third defense, like Seattle here versus Denver. They're ranked third against the run. Denver, I think, is going to be a pretty good defense, but people who are new to DFS, I'm assuming that they're less likely to make that play when they see that matchup. But in reality, it might not be that they're as good as last year.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's kind of like with everything, right? So when we see these numbers, we see opponent rank, you guys, how you guys do a fantasy draft. And I don't know if you've done auction drafts. It doesn't matter. It could be a snake draft, but they have the default rankings in there, right? Or they have the default auction value. In an auction, the market is created in that draft, right? How much a player is worth, it doesn't matter what ESPN or Yahoo says it's worth. It's what those 12 people in that league decide it's worth. And yet those numbers, when you see next to Leonard Fournette, his auction value is $52. We, in the psychology industry, we call this a psychological anchoring effect. Even though we know the number has no meaning as it pertains to us and our interests, people are still going to lock into that number and assign meaning to it. And you won't necessarily be able to get a value on Leonard Fournette because everyone's saying, well, ESPN says it's worth this much. So that's a long-winded example of saying people are going to look at these opponent ranks on DraftKings and they got them nice and color-coded. We have, a standard black for the middle of the rung, and we have the green for the bad defenses. And yeah, those are going to dictate people's decisions. And I think that's another clever way. Like I'm looking at Ezekiel Elliott here, and they got that second that they're playing the Carolina rush D. And I'm not going to be scared off of that just because they were the second best rush D last year. Ezekiel Elliott is going to get a shit ton of volume. And I think he's a great play, especially with everyone wanting to gravitate to Kamara or maybe going down to Christian McCaffrey or Melvin Gordon. So those are situations that I think you really try to exploit people's tendencies falling prey to their own cognitive biases. Fuck, I'm smart.
Manz,
sound like a psych major.
What are your thoughts on kind of not directly related to DFS? What are your thoughts on the Le'Veon Bell situation? Do you think he's going to show up?
Yeah, I feel like tomorrow is the do or die day. Wednesday is normally the day that the veterans will get their first practice during the week after maybe taking a Monday and Tuesday off of the games. If Bell reports tomorrow, obviously he should be good to go. Although last year he reported late and had a pretty rough week one game. So even if he does show up, I'd be a little concerned about there being some rust. I mean, we all know Le'Veon Bell's great. I also know he doesn't rely a ton on his pure athleticism to get his fantasy points. It's his involvement in the pass game. It's his patience at the line of scrimmage. It's his involvement at the goal line. So some of that is mitigated, but I am concerned there. But the more I talk about it, everybody's having these thoughts about Bell, right? Maybe that makes him a very interesting play. I don't know if you guys have seen the weather reports, but Pittsburgh, the game is in Cleveland, and there's already some reports of some high wind gusts, maybe some precipitation, which of course lends itself to a more ground and pound game. And they don't have much behind James Conner. So as I'm talking this out with you guys, I'm starting to turn myself on to Bell as a bit of a contrarian play if he suits up. But I would say if he's not in camp tomorrow, I'm starting to think it's just an auto fade, even if he does show up, because that is just so few time. And I frankly don't know. Sometimes we see Josh Gordon, right? he's suspended, but I'm out there looking at his Snapchat, dude, and he's, working out like this, like a demon, dude, and he's jacked up, and I'm like, all right, I feel good about Josh Gordon. I don't know what the deal is with Bell. I don't know if he's staying in shape. Apparently, I think someone said he was like on a beach or something. So I think there's reason to be a little concerned, and it's a fine line between a contrarian play and a stupid play, and I think this is going to veer toward a stupid play real quick.
If he doesn't suit up, would you play Connor?
Yeah, that would be interesting because let me see, how much is Connor here on DraftKings? He's 4,500. So yeah, he's right in that range of those other cheap guys. He would be a great play. I believe the Steelers will use James Conner as just a replacement bell cow. There's a few situations like that in the league. Chase Edmonds behind David Johnson and even John Kelly behind Todd Gurley. These teams that are used to just having a bell cow, they want to be able to have a fill-in and not have to turn to a committee because that's just not how their playbook is set up. They don't want to have to tip their hand with these plays, and that's a long-winded way of saying I think James Conner fits that mold in that he would get around 20 touches if Bell is out. The problem, of course, is I think he would become the trendiest player pick on this slate, and I could see him approaching 35 to 40% ownership, which that gets really tough. That gets really tough to use him at that ownership. But yeah, I think he would be a good play.
So we really want to get the Fantasy Griddle listeners involved with you on Twitter and everything. Are you still doing the Manz Fan of the Week? And how does somebody become the Manz Fan of the Week? Man, that is... I appreciate you reminding me. Last year I did the weekly Manz Maker shows, and it was more of a produced show. I had my producer, add in a few production elements. This year, because the Manz is so busy, I'm just going to be doing a weekly live stream, but I had completely forgotten that I had done Manz Fans of the Week. And you bring up a good point. And maybe this is what it's going to be, because last year, there were definitely some candidates that deserved it, that had shown their worth as the Manz Fans of the Week. But toward the end of the season, I was kind of having to rack my brain. Who should get it? And really, that's not how it should work, right? It should be on a merit base. So I will say this. If someone goes out of their way to really wow me, and I'm not going to say what that is. I mean, you just have to figure that out for yourself. I will, on the weekly Manz Maker shows, be sure to highlight a Manz Fans of the Week if they deserve it.
Appreciate you coming on here, Manz. You're an entertaining guy. I'm happy I got my Manz coin, and I already got a lineup ready for your league. And why don't you tell the listeners how they can sign up for your weekly league?
Yeah. Before I get into all of my various plugs, I have to ask, how did you guys get or decide upon the name Fantasy Griddle? Because I have my own theory. So you can either tell me the real thing, or I can tell you how I imagine it and just forever let that be the picture in my head.
We had been talking about doing a fantasy show for a few years, and something we really wanted to do was make sure that we served up hot takes, and going along with serving hot takes kind of sounds like a cooking kind of thing. And we were just thinking that hot takes would, be really good off of a griddle. Unless Duncan has something to add to that, that's kind of where I'm at.
That was pretty much it, man. Fresh and hot off the griddle.
Okay, well, a couple things. First of all, I thought in my head it was that you two just got cheaped up one night, just super lifted, just, feeling yourselves. And you guys were like, dude, I want some fucking waffles right now. And Duncan was like, yeah, dude, waffles sound incredible. And then Michael was like, dude, what if we have waffles and start a fantasy site? And then Duncan was like, dude, that would be incredible. And then Michael was like, what if I call it the Griddle, dude? And then next thing you guys know, you had your podcast. So that's kind of how it went down in my head.
I'm glad you brought this up, because our first logo was waffles, and Duncan said we had to switch to pancakes because no one makes waffles on a griddle.
It was a heated debate.
Straight on this?
No pun intended, I'm sure, right? You know what? I am more familiar with making waffles on a waffle iron. But I'd like to think if there was enough determination, you could get it done on a griddle.
Thank you.
But a question, you guys mentioned that the griddle is in reference to hot takes, and I know you guys are being good interviewers and stuff, but I need to hear, if you guys are the hot take artists, what are your guys' week 1 or I know you guys maybe are a little more season long guys. Let me get one of these hot takes that you guys have been sharing with your listeners. I need the good stuff, the hot stuff, the griddle stuff.
All right, I got one. Sony Michel is going to be a top 15 running back this year.
In both standard and PPRs? Are you?
I'm talking
where are you
half
going with
PPR.
that?
That's kind of my go-to here. So I'll split the middle.
Dude, that's spicy, dude. That's hot. I can feel the steam coming off that griddle. So you're not worried about the injury stuff. You're not worried about Rex Burkhead. You're not worried about Jeremy Hill maybe getting goal line carries. You think he's going to come in and take control of that backfield real soon?
Yeah, I think he's going to be a beast. The Patriots don't spend a first round pick on a running back really ever. And actually, I saw Bart Scott, and I don't really like Bart Scott, but he knows a lot about football. And he was saying that he thinks that Sony Michel is the most NFL-ready running back coming out of college. I think the knee thing has got people scared off, but he's back to practice, and he's going to be catching passes from Brady. So I think they're trying to make him more of like an Alvin Kamara type of player out of the New England backfield. So I'm very high on Sony Michel this year.
And Duncan, just so all the listeners know that you're super unbiased and don't have any kind of homerish tendencies, why don't you tell people what state you live in?
Yeah, I'm from Massachusetts. So.
Oh, okay. So you might be a little more rose-colored glasses. Okay. All right. Just checking.
Well, Pete Manzinelli, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Make sure that you follow him on Twitter at Pete Manzinelli. Pete, you mind sending us out tonight? Yeah, dudes. I appreciate you guys having me on the show. I'm glad I could take the griddle and turn it up to 11. And it's going to be a great season. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Manz.
Get paid, get laid.
Well, that was our interview with Pete Manzinelli. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Pete Manzinelli for fantasy football, cryptocurrency, and poker content. Remember to check us out on fantasygriddle.com. To stay up to date on all of our blogs and podcasts, make sure you follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Fantasy Griddle. Duncan, anything else before we sign off?
If you guys have any questions, hit us up on Twitter at Fantasy Griddle or leave us a comment on the podcast. Wherever you're listening, make sure that you hit that follow or subscribe button. And if you enjoyed the show and have the time, please leave us a good review and help us grow the podcast. Thanks for listening. See you next time.